as coach, if you can just jot this down. So if I'm in a training session, what sort of activities are going to be involved in the training session? Or if I'm going into a game, what sort of activities are going to be involved in that game? Okay. And again, I'll go back to the question that I asked at the start. If the purpose of a warm-up is to prepare the body for the activities that are to follow, is static stretching as appropriate as a dynamic stretch would be, where rather than holding a position, we're bringing that body part through a range of movements? So that would be the question that we'd ask. Okay. So if you think about what camogie is, as Stuart would have alluded to earlier, it's a very complex mix of multi-directional movements, both maximal and sub-maximal, so sprinting and running at different variety of paces. You have plyometric exercises, so jumping, and then obviously you have your camogie specific skills. And another very important part as coaches is that there is a huge reliance on decision making, both from a sports point of view, but also from, if you think about it, like Stuart would have talked about earlier, the difference between change of direction agility, where I've set out cones, or deciding that the ball is over there and I have to change direction to get it. That's obviously something that we need to also include, because we've said already the purpose of the warm-up is to prepare the body for what's to follow. So if that's what's to follow, we need to try and include all of those elements in any of the warm-up that we're doing, okay? So generally the structure, and some of you may have seen this in different guises. So you may be familiar with a thing called RAMP. So raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate. So effectively that would just describe what a warm-up should do. So in terms of the what I'm going to talk about is all warm-ups should have general movements, which is related to the movement that they're going to be performing, dynamic movements, which is involve your change of direction, some sort of dynamic stretching and mobility activities. And then as we progress towards the end of the warm-up, either going into our training session or into our game, where the activities that we're performing are a little bit higher intensity. So that's the sort of progression that we should be looking to for all of our warm-ups. So I know that we have a variety of coaching backgrounds on the webinar tonight, and we also have a variety of age groups that they will be involved with. So a question that we would get asked quite frequently is, well, what's a warm-up for children or for Go Games? And really in that developmental stage, we don't even need to think about warm-up. We don't even need to use the word. It's covered. How do we cover it? It's things like, for example, I'll give you two there: fox and hen games, vertical jumping games, hopscotch, all of those things that we would do in the schoolyard almost, or that we are doing down at the Grasshoppers or the nursery at a weekend. All of those activities are fundamentally sound, and they're very much adequate in terms of a warm-up for that age group. It's really important, again, to stress that we don't even think about talking about it in terms of warm-up at that age group, because they haven't physically developed where we even need to be going into that discussion. Okay, so for the Go Games age group, we have it covered with our ABCs, the running, jumping, catching, throwing, all that sort of stuff. So that's really important to state at the start. There is some exercises that we can do in general warm-ups that will obviously be covered with the ABC RJCT as well. So it's not just that they're just only appropriate for that age group. They can be done over any age group, but the ABC RJCT really have the warm-up covered for that Go Games age group. So in terms of then just an example of a structured warm-up that we have done plenty of research on is what we call the Activate warm-up. You may have seen also examples like the GA15. They're one and the same. They're all based on research that came out of Santa Monica years ago. So the FIFA 11, then you had the GA15, and the Activate is one that we've decided to use. The reason that we've decided to use it from a camogie perspective is because we looked at it in detail, and there is a little bit more in terms of coaching for injury prevention for knee injuries. And that's why we decided that it would be more appropriate for Camogie. Again, if you're doing any of these elements or you're including any of these elements, it's better than not including them. So where the Activate is the one that we would say that it's very appropriate. Once there is a similar structure to any warm-up, it's fine. Okay, so the Activate is broken into 3 phases. The first phase is running, cutting, and landing. Really important to emphasize here that what we actually do as part of this warm-up is we coach our players from under 12 up, let's talk, to run, to cut, and to land. So how we do it is we teach things like A march and A skip for running, change of direction stuff for cutting, so slow plant and cut, and landing then as well. So things like jumping for a high catch and to land properly. So these are things that we're trying to coach. And it's really important to emphasize that the coaching cues for each of those activities is actually important, because if we coach them enough with the right cues, it has been shown that we can actually reduce the risk of injury. And particularly from a Camogie perspective, cutting and landing are 2 activities where we would see an increased risk in knee injuries, for example. So there's just examples, and just to show you, so that warm-up, those slides, so all of this, the pictures that we're showing, they're actually Camogie resources that I'll show you at the end that are available on the learning portal, so we can go through that at the end. So things for running, cutting, and landing. So examples would be jogging, 1/2 and 3/4 pace, focusing on the upper body, A march and A skip, using the opposite arm, opposite leg. So things like you can see in the picture there. Partner shuffle again, teaching our athletes to change direction properly. The next phase then is, and this is a little bit of a bonus for you. So we've talked about strengths with Stuart, and basically the Activate warm-up, phase 2 of the Activate warm-up, is a strength and conditioning program, on-field strength and conditioning program that can be used from the ages of 12 up. There is some of the activities there that you may not necessarily include for a 12-year-old, but what we can do is, the importance of it is that we can start to add these little bits. We can just add the building blocks slowly as the season goes on, or as they progress from the different age groups, to the point where they become proficient performing all of these activities. What the guys that developed the Activate would say is that we would do phase 1 and phase 3 as part of our pre-game session, and phase 2, which is strength and plyometrics, we can do as part of our training sessions. So again, it's really important to note that all of the activities in phase 2, they contain all of that stuff that Stuart would have talked about. Does it have a squat pattern? Yes. Does it have a hinging pattern? Yes. Does it have a core exercise that involves bracing? Yes. Does it have an anti-rotation exercise? Yes. So side planking would be an anti-rotation exercise. Does it have the so hip hinging? Yes, in terms of the arabesque. So all of the movement patterns that we have spoken about before are covered here. And I would say that, from me, it'd be really important for coaches to understand, I don't need to get these athletes into a gym if they're not proficient at performing all of the exercises on that slide. So that's a really good place to start. And you can see there that it's split into circuit 1 and circuit 2. So circuit 2 is a progression of circuit 1. So we can go from circuit 1 to circuit 2 after 6, 8, whatever weeks, once we have proficiency at doing the exercises in circuit 1. And again, just to emphasize, they've done research on this, and they've actually shown that it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do it in the order of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. We could do phase 1 and phase 3 as part of our training warm-up, have our training session. We have limited access to pitches because that's what happens. We don't have, we're definitely time poor in terms of access to our pitches at times. So if we have a little small plot of land, be it in the car park or somewhere on the side of the pitch, we could then, at the end of the session, incorporate some of the phase 2 exercise. So it's very flexible in that sense. Again, they're the type of exercises that you will encounter. So arabesque, or single leg deadlift, which is a hip hinge movement, and plank. They're the exercises. Another one just to note here is the Nordic curl. So I've done a number of workshops, injury prevention workshops and warm-up workshops in the past, and Nordic curls are one that tend to come up quite a bit. So people are asking about, should we include them, should we not include them? People think that their hamstrings are pulling when they're doing the exercise. Nordic curls have been proven really, really effective at reducing the risk of hamstring injuries. Hamstring injuries are very prevalent in camogie, based on research, and therefore we would advise coaches to try and include Nordic curls as part of a strength and conditioning program for their athletes. It is probably more, it would probably be a better idea to introduce it maybe from 16 up, depending on the progression of the girls, obviously. But we would definitely recommend that we start to use Nordic curls as part of a strength and conditioning program to try and prevent hamstring injuries. They're an excellent exercise to improve what's called the eccentric strength of the hamstring. So definitely just to flag that there. The last phase then of the Activate warm-up is the agility and power stuff. So remember what I said was the recommendations is phase 1 and phase 3 are before matches, and the phase 2 bit is to include in training. So the phase 3 stuff are the things that we are going to be going into just before we go into our training session. So if you think about what a training session looks like for an awful lot of people, it could be, right, after my warm-up, I'm going to do a block of speed work. So speed work would be a high intensity activity. So therefore, in order to prepare ourselves for that, we need to include some high intensity activities towards the end of our warm-up. Okay, so the things that we have in here, so examples of the exercises that we have in here would be 3/4 pace running, running forwards and backwards, dynamic lunges, fast feet shuffle. And again, all of the stuff with the Activate, although if you went on to the Ulster GAA, who are the ones that developed it, it looks very structured, very much, an awful lot of cones set out. Yes, that's true, but we can take the Activate warm-up and incorporate it into what we do regularly on our training pitch or before our games. Yes, we can include a sliotar. We can include all of that stuff with quite a lot of ease. There are some of them that are a little bit easier to incorporate than others. But once we have the really strong building blocks in there, it has been proven to be very effective. Okay, so that's one of the big key take-homes from my side. So again, just to show you examples of the stuff that we would have in the phase 3 would be forward and backward running. Again, emphasis on coaching our athletes. So it's not just including them as part of a warm-up, it's actually coaching athletes to change direction properly, to run forward and backward properly, to land properly. So all of that stuff is incorporated into all of the 3 phases. Fast feet shuffle again, so that's like, imagine if you're standing on one side of a line on 2 feet and you have to shuffle your feet backward and forward over the line, imagining that the ground is on fire. So the emphasis there is on having as little ground contact as you can, moving the feet as quickly as possible. And then a dynamic lunge would be another example of an activity that's incorporated into the phase 3 of the Activate program. That's again, it's a more dynamic, high intensity exercise. So just in terms of the key take-home messages, I know I'm after flying through an awful lot of information here. In terms of the key take-homes, so our warm-ups all should reflect the activities that we're going to be performing directly after. So I use the example of a training session. If we're going from a training session where we're going to go into a block of speed, for example, then we're going to go into some small-sided games or some technical camogie practice. That means that in our warm-up, we should have some high-intensity activities to prepare ourselves for the speed session, but we should also have some camogie-specific skills incorporated into the warm-up. So we should definitely be looking to include striking over a variety of distances using both sides, and pickups, so roller, jab lift, catching, hand passing, blocking. All of those exercises or all of those activities can be included as part of your either pre-training or pre-game warm-up. It should include general movement, dynamic movements, stretches, and high-intensity activities, as I said. For children, Go Games or the Go Games age group, it's covered. We don't even need to talk about warm-ups. It's covered in your fundamental movement skills, ABC, running, jumping, catching, throwing. And the Activate then is an example of a warm-up routine that has been proven to be very effective at reducing injury risk. And not only that, it has been shown that we can incorporate the warm-up over, like it doesn't have to be that we need to get proficient at doing that straight away. We can introduce it slowly over the period of a season or a number of seasons in order for our players to become proficient at it. So my task to you guys is to try and use the Activate warm-up as the foundation to design your own warm-ups before training and games. And that's enough from me now. There's some of the resources. So again, we'll be giving out a list of resources. So that's some of the resources to go to. I would guide you to the learning portal as a first port of call. That has very good information in there. And thank you very much. And if there's any questions, we have time to answer them now.
Hi, Paul. Just to allow people there the opportunity to put some questions into the chat function. There's a couple of questions that came in earlier today. Just one of them here. Can you give examples of activities that are appropriate for the Go Games age group? Again,
so when we're talking about warm-ups for Go Games age group, just to re-emphasize the point, again, we're talking about our fundamental movement skills. So things like chasing games, any of those evasion skills, vertical jumps, standing long jump. I mean, we used to do, cone up, cone down, where you have half the group have to turn the cones facing one way, and then the other half of the group have to turn the cones facing another way. All of those sort of activities that are covered in the ABC, running, jumping, catching, throwing, they're all really appropriate for the Go Games age group.
So, Paul, there's another question. How long would you warm up? Would your warm up be for under 8s to under 12s age group?
Yeah, so for that age group, I mean, you don't even need to be thinking about it in terms of warm up, really. But again, like 10 minutes should be fine. Like, obviously, the attention span in that Go Games age group is much, it's obviously a little bit lower. So for those, I mean, you wouldn't even need to be thinking about, okay, so we've done our warm-up phase, now we're going into the main session. The games that you're incorporating as part of your training sessions for that age group, like the ones that I've given the examples of, they're more than appropriate. You don't really need to be thinking about, okay, well, I have 10 minutes allotted for my warm-up, and now I'm going into a 50-minute block of the skill-based stuff. Again, just to re-emphasize that the fundamental movement skills should be there throughout the whole of the session, rather than just saying, right, I'm just going to do it in the warm-up, and now we're on to the camogie skills.
And I have another question here. Is there a place for static stretching at all in warm-up, or is it more suitable for after a session, i.e. in a warm-down?
And again, I'm glad that somebody asked that, because the static stretching stuff, there's no right or wrong answer, first of all. Static stretching is used to improve flexibility. So the reason we would static stretch is to try and improve the length that we can get when we stretch a muscle. So yes, static stretching is appropriate if we're doing a flexibility session. But as part of a warm-up, and what I would do, for example, is with my lads, I normally have about a 10-minute window to warm them up. I would do all the dynamic movement stuff. And in that window, before they go over to the hurling coaches or whatever it is, the main body of the session, I would give them a little bit of a window to do a self-selected static stretch or whatever, any self-selected activity that they want to do themselves. And the reason I do that is because some players, by their nature, they feel like if I hold a static stretch, I get a bit of relief from that. I don't feel like I'm going to injure myself as much. So that's where I would find that the static stretch can be used. Again, going back to the other part of that question, in the cool down, all you really want to do in the cool down is to make sure that the heart rate has dropped and that our body is starting to return to a temperature that it was close to neutral. Yes, there is a window in your cool down to do some static stretching, because we can try and then do it as a flexibility session. But remember, the reason we static stretch is to try and improve flexibility. We don't static stretch to warm up, if that answers the question.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And another question here now, and again, it's sort of for that under 8s to under 12s at the Go Games. Would you recommend like a cool down after training for that age group?
Again, like you could sort of reduce the intensity of the activity as the session progresses towards the end. But for that age group, you're not really going to be worried as much about warm up and cool down, because they just haven't developed the physical capabilities to even warrant considering warming up and cooling down. So their system, like the whole metabolism, all of that sort of stuff, the cardiovascular system, that's all in a very developmental stage. So it's not really as appropriate. It's more when we start to get into the peak height velocity. So when we start to get into that growth spurt age group, when we need to start thinking about warm up and cool down.
Thanks, Paul. That's great. And I'm just conscious now of time. We've about 30 seconds left before we're pulled out of the breakout rooms. So maybe any questions that we haven't got to, we can post them out later or include them.
Yeah, exactly. So again, just to re-emphasize before we go, that there will be resources sent out, and I mean, I'll be putting my email address on it as well, that if any coaches have any questions related to any of the topics tonight, or my topic in particular, to send on an email. I mean, I can gladly try and respond. I'm not saying I'm going to be responding straight away, but if there is questions, I have no problem, and because it will help me for the stuff that I put up on the learning portal as well. Thanks very much, guys. We've actually just been told that there's 5 minutes left. So if there's any more questions there, guys, just keep them coming. Sorry, I didn't realise that.
Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
Okay, just let me look.
I can't see the chat there.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to double check to see if there any. Okay, so we've a question in here. After the Go Games group, what other age groups would be considered as a progression point in what type of warm-ups you were doing? Example, 10 to 12, 13 to 16, etc.
Yeah, so what we've done, if you look at the learning portal, is actually the player welfare booklet. So we would have done research with DCU, and I mean, age groups are sort of, chronological age is arbitrary anyway, but we broke it down effectively from 12 to 14, then, sorry, 12 and under 12 and under 13, under 14 and under 15, and then under 16 and under 17. So sort of 3 phases once you get out of the Go Games age group. And we broke the Activate warm-up down from the most basic fundamental activities in the Activate right the way up. So as you go, we added on a little bit more of complexity from under 12, under 13, in sort of the first section, then under 13, under 14, which is section 2, and then the last section, which is under 16, under 15 and under 16. So that's the way that we would have broken it down in the player welfare booklet. And the important thing to note there is that if you look at the Activate, phase 1, the phase 1 activities were common to them all. So if you think about what phase 1 activities are, it's running, jumping, cutting, landing, all of that sort of stuff. So in that phase 1 of the Activate, it has an awful lot of the activities, and coaches are doing those activities routinely as part of their warm-up anyway. What I would emphasize is, do coaches, and this is the question that I'd be asking you guys, do we actually include them as part of our warm-up, or do we include them as part of our session, or do we coach them as part of our session? The thing that I have found is coaches are very, they're reluctant to teach landing and cutting technique because they're not sure about it themselves. So that's why I would ask coaches to use those resources to say, okay, so these are the coaching points that I need to use to cue somebody to change direction. And again, if you think about, so one of the examples that I would give when we're using coaching cues, we always try cue from external to the body rather than internal. And what I mean by that is related to something that a child or a youth or an adult can see from outside the body. Don't be saying, do this with your hips, do this with your knees. An example would be, if you want to try and coach somebody to land, say, imagine you're landing on a horse, and that should, I know it sounds quite funny, and I robbed that. I'm not going to claim ownership of that one. I was at a talk by a guy that's doing an awful lot of research in coaching cues. But examples like that, running on hot ground, all of that sort of stuff is far more efficient at cueing for coaching than to tell, do this with your knee, do this with your foot, do this with your ankle. I hope that answers the question.
That's great, Paul. I think there is actually now only a couple of seconds left. I don't think we'd have. There is one question, I don't know, before we get pulled out. Any tips on how to keep an under 15 engaged in drills? Oh, we're going to leave.
Variety, definitely. So trying to, and that's why, although you could structure your warm-up before a game, I would try and make sure that you use plenty of variety in the way that you would incorporate your warm-up into your training session, for example. So I never really do the same warm-up in training sessions back to back. I try and vary it. Although the elements are the same, I try to vary the way that I include them.
That's great, Paul. Thanks very, very much. There's